Welcome, one and all, to the Techforce in Africa podcast, where we discuss and explore some of the important issues that are affecting technology businesses in Africa. Now, this week's episode actually focuses on sustainability and business as a platform for change. I'm delighted to announce that for today, we're going to be chatting to Zuko Mdwaba, who's here with us as the Area Vice President and Country Leader for Salesforce in South Africa, as well as Brian Nell, who is the CEO of nonprofit Rise Against Hunger. Zuko will be sharing his thoughts on what is needed to actually create a meaningful change in the sustainable business world, and what he's actually learned over 25 plus years in a career in technology. Whereas Brian is going to be chatting to us about how businesses can contribute to a sustainable approach to eradicating hunger in Africa, and what his organization is actually doing to create sustainable projects that actually help local communities. Zuko, Brian, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mdwaba.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I think a good place for us to start, usually, to get the blood flowing, we like to do a bit of an icebreaker. So that's where we're going to start before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's discussion. So firstly, Rugby Sevens or World Cup?
Rugby Sevens.
Yo?
World Cup.
Okay. Future on Mars or present here on Earth?
I'll stick with what I know on Earth.
I like that. And then?
I'm with you on that one. We'll stay here for now.
Okay, cool. And then reuse or recycle?
This is a tricky one. I'll go with recycle.
Reuse.
Physical meeting or Zoom?
Physical meeting. Any day.
Also physical, definitely.
Netflix or YouTube?
I'd go with Netflix.
Netflix.
Yeah. YouTube to educate myself,
Yeah.
Netflix to relax. Yeah.
It's hard to pick one.
To begin with, we are going to be starting off, as I said, we have Brian and Zuko here, but I'm going to start off with Zuko, who's actually had a number of roles with a number of tech industry giants. And can you tell us a little bit, around, some of that background and, what actually made you take your recent role over at Salesforce?
Yeah, thanks, Mdwaba. With pleasure. I don't generally like talking about myself, but I will do it for the purposes of what we're trying to achieve here today.
Yeah.
Maybe let me take a backdrop in terms of background where I started. So I'm a rural boy. I grew up in the rural areas of Eastern Cape. I then went to the University of the Western Cape and studied computer science and statistics, which was a huge gamble for me because, as you can imagine, this was in the early 90s. I knew nothing about computer science.
Yeah.
And sure you'd appreciate that parents back in those days, they wanted you to go to medicine, they wanted you to take legal and all these other formal professions. But I was fascinated by technology from a young age. I think a big part of that inspiration was from science fiction movies like Star Trek. And I was very strong in, still am, in mathematics and science. Huge inspiration came from my grandfather, who was a mathematician. He's late now. He was a Professor T.W. Kambule, who was a professor, first black professor at Wits University.
Wow.
So I took a lot of inspiration out of that. That's how I built my trajectory in terms of getting to where I am today.
Yeah.
Post my studies, I had the privilege of working for companies that were leading at the time when I was working for them. I have worked for possibly 95% of my career for multinationals.
Yeah.
I worked for companies like Atos Origin, Schlumberger Sema. I worked for Oracle.
Yeah.
I worked for SAS Institute, big in statistics. First time I really tested my side of my second major, which was statistics.
Yeah.
And then had the privilege of working for companies that were born in the cloud in my latter part of my career. What attracted me to Salesforce really is my passion for technology.
Yeah.
I think before being a business person, I'm a technologist. I really, really love companies that are at the cutting edge of innovation and doing all these amazing things. Their values, their core values really resonated with me. Innovation being one of them, equity, trust and customer success, ensuring that what we do for customers is the reason why we are existing as an organization.
Yeah.
Last but not least, is sustainability, which is a really, really amazing point of interest and something that we need to take seriously. So that's how I joined Salesforce.
Really sounds like quite a storied career, that you've gone through, and at least you've managed to maintain yourself in your areas of passion and strength. I actually like the fact that you make a distinction between mathematics and statistics, because I think a lot of people just look at it as all numbers related and all that. But now that you're here, at Salesforce, can you talk to us about what the journey has been like, actually establishing a physical presence, for the company in South Africa, and what have been some of the big challenges that you've faced in actually doing so?
It's been an amazing journey. It's really been a privilege for me to be part of a journey like that. Of course, I did a similar thing. I started Workday in South Africa a couple of years back before I joined Salesforce. So it's really, really a privilege for me in my career to be able to start amazing companies like this. So from a Salesforce point of view, when we started the journey in South Africa, basically building an entity, Salesforce had built a strong foundation already in South Africa. There was a significant amount of presence through our customers that we've had, that we were at the time serving remotely. It just made total sense for us to have physical presence here. So we opened the entity beginning of this year.
Yeah.
It's been a journey and a half. As you can imagine, you asked about challenges.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would appreciate that it was on the back of a pandemic. And it was at a point where we're not sure whether we're out or we're still within the pandemic. So, but be as it may, it was, I think a big part of the challenge was moving out of that working from home world and trying to get back to the way of working today. I don't think it's really back to the office. It's the way of working in the day and age that we're living in. So as Salesforce, we're really at a sweet spot to help organizations find that way of pivoting and get to the next level in terms of engaging with their customers.
No, it really sounds like this year has been quite busy. And one can imagine that for the foreseeable future that, your time and your energy will be directed to making sure that everything on the ground is, where it needs to be. And I think for a lot of people, they've just accepted that, we're just here in this world post, pandemic. What does that, mean actually going forward? So Brian, I want to, move to you, because you guys have a big goal. Eradicating hunger is huge. Right? How do you actually balance trying to solve for hunger? Because it means you need to feed, you literally need to feed people, but at the same time trying to balance that out with, some of the sustainability issues, such as, how the farming practices and the like. Talk to us about that.
Well, so our primary sort of focus is on distributing nutritious meals, predominantly to children between the ages of 1 and 6. We believe it's very important to provide children during their formative years, their developmental years, with the right nutrients to grow. And our programs mainly link it with education. So we're linking good nutrition and education. But as you say, it's a mammoth task. One meal at a time, one kid at a time, and so you just keep working into that. But our long-term strategy is moving a lot more into community food security, and empowering communities to grow their own food and become more self-sufficient. So eventually the handout side will reduce, and the farming side and all the other different opportunities that there are to produce food, whether it's eggs, vegetables, bakery, bread, those kind of things. They'll become more and more prominent.
Initiatives like this really, really need to be acknowledged. I mean, I mentioned in my intro the privilege that I have working for Salesforce. If it weren't for Salesforce, I probably would not have interacted with Brian's organization. They're doing an amazing job in the country and around the world. I had the pleasure, so Salesforce have got something that we call VTO, so volunteering time off. Basically, every single employee out of more than 80,000 employees have got 7 days of giving back, basically volunteering time. And I had the pleasure of my very first VTO, in fact, 2 of them I've done with Rise Against Hunger, which was a really, really humbling experience. Really made me realize, it was a wake-up call for me to realize the mammoth task that we are faced with from a global perspective. So kudos to Rise Against Hunger.
No, thank you. I always say we can't do what we do without business. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Our colleagues in the US have been using Salesforce for quite a long time. And we've recently started to adopt the program, and we sort of implementing it and building it out. So our first phase of using Salesforce is more from a customer relationship management, the CRM side of things.
Yeah.
Because that's really critical. We've got different divisions within the organization. There's the marketing and fundraising, and then there's the distribution, and then there's the sustainable farming, and then the finance, and everybody's using different spreadsheets on cloud-based platforms. But to bring all that data together, and specifically when it comes to donors, to ensure we know how much they're giving us, what their focus is, and it's also critical for reporting. Quite a few years ago, a donor would just give you money to tick the box to get the tax rebate, and just maybe use it as a bit of a marketing tool. These days it's really changed. They have whole divisions within these corporates to really align who they're going to support with their CSI initiatives, and then they want to know that the impact that they're making. I think as we grow, and as an NGO, we're not in that tech space, but we have to up our game and really get into it, because from a donor relationship part, all our impact that we do, our distribution can become almost real time as it's uploaded out in the field. And it just makes it so much easier to share with the donor. In fact, you could almost allow donors to have real time on the impact that they're making in that space that they're supporting. So the whole data collection and data management is really key in the NGO space, if you want to keep moving forward.
Okay. Zuko, Brian is bringing up a very interesting point about the changing mindsets, within corporates around issues of sustainability, and how they're engaging with their communities. We talk about people, planet, profit, and the like. Could you talk to us about how you've seen attitudes around sustainability, perhaps evolving or changing, through your career?
I think you alluded to this earlier as business becoming more and more a platform for change. I've seen over the past couple of years companies taking that shift. Obviously, for any private organization or publicly listed entity, at the core, one of the things that's important is profitability. But companies have realized that it's almost impossible doing that with neglecting the most important thing, which is the planet we live in. And companies are starting to realize this. Certainly Salesforce, we are trying to encourage people to leave the planet a better place than we found it. So combining these two is actually an amazing journey for all of us. And we, not as individuals as Salesforce, because we're not going to win this battle alone, certainly we trying to be more and more involved with organizations around the world that are part of driving the sustainability agenda. We can talk later on maybe about organizations like 1T.org that we are a founder member of. The T is trees, basically is 1 trillion trees around the world. A commitment that was made in Salesforce as part of that organization by 2030. And what we have done is basically driving the planting of trees around the world. And we currently from a Salesforce perspective, we're not doing this alone. We've planted more than 60 million trees around the world. And that is something that to help, with the whole drive around deforestation and ensuring that we're offsetting the carbon emissions that we're continuously faced with as a planet.
A couple of years ago, when I was in business school at Rhodes, it was specifically leadership for sustainability. And there was a big theme, around that. And at the time, they were actually predicting, to say that this is going to become a huge issue for corporates and businesses, going forward. And they were trying to train us, to start thinking in that way. So it's always very interesting to see how, what we were being taught about back in those days, that I think they might have been a little bit ahead, of their time, when you then reflect on the experience that you've had. And one of the things that then comes with that is reporting. And that's actually something that, Brian mentioned just now, to say the issue of sustainability is now being reported on so much more. Are multinationals doing enough, to report, on the issues, that they're dealing with, particularly around their sustainability targets? And I think emissions has tended to be a very big and contentious issue.
Well, it's hard to say, are they doing enough? It is a journey. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Just on the point you mentioned about things that you learned many years ago, and then they come to the surface many years later, and you're like, wow, this was actually quite visionary. I'll give you an example, at the risk of digressing a little bit. When I was doing my first year 30 years ago, I was studying about artificial intelligence, and it just didn't make sense to me. But look at how it is applied on everything that we're doing nowadays. To come back to your question, I think one of the things that they might not be doing enough, companies around the world today, but what is really, really encouraging, this topic is becoming more and more topical. A good example is that I always joke and say it was my welcome present to Salesforce, because when I joined Salesforce introduced sustainability, which was the beginning of this year. Sustainability is a core value, right? And I'm seeing more and more companies starting to do this. They might not necessarily have it as a core value as yet, but they are having those conversations. Boardroom meetings include sustainability. They have to report on sustainability. ESG is becoming more and more topical. CEOs have got this as part of their KPIs. They are measured on this. So I would say my answer to your question around, are they doing enough? I think what we're doing now, or what organizations are doing now, is arguably quicker, more visible than what was done maybe the past 20 years, or when you were at Rhodes, from an action point of view.
And when it comes to that, actually, it is very interesting to see that a number of corporates have actually started, in addition to just KPIs, some of the executive packages for some of the JSE listed companies are now being tied to some of those ESG, ESG goals. So for Salesforce in particular, you mentioned the fact that it's now become a core value, right? That has been announced, this has been communicated through the organization. How is this actually translating on a day-to-day level over at Salesforce, and how does it, how do you make it so that it's not the tick box type of thing that Brian was alluding to earlier on?
Well, good question. I touched on this briefly as one example of the 1T.org, planting of trees around the world. That's something that's quite significant, and I'm sure you'd agree with me. 60 million trees is a lot of trees, and that is still growing. We're still building on that. But we're part of a bigger organization, so it's not just about Salesforce. It's the 1T.org organization has a responsibility to plant 8 trillion trees. So that's the one part. The one thing that is also quite important is that Brian alluded to this, is the reporting on this. Salesforce are reporting to this on this on an annual basis. It's visible, it's in the public domain. We say exactly where we are. And where we are today, as things stand, we are sitting at net zero carbon emissions. And you'd say, what does that mean? Because carbon emissions are continuously happening. I take a flight to Europe or to the US, that's carbon emissions. But what we're doing, we trying to slow down the acceleration in terms of the net zero emissions. We're trying to be ahead of the curve. If we were to be able to do that with many more organizations around the world, I would say that we've got a better chance of winning the battle against climate change and all those things that we trying to play catch up, a lot of catch up. So which means that the acceleration has to be at an exponential rate for us to continuously be ahead of the curve. So what we're doing that as an organization. And we also have, as you know, we are a cloud company. So we build technology. So one of the things that we do, we help organizations around the world with a cloud that's specifically for sustainability, a net zero cloud. So that is basically around for companies to put a baseline on where they are and what is it that they want to achieve. with a time frame
Yeah.
and be able to measure that. You know, when you were talking about CEOs and listed companies and at the stock exchange level, they need to be able to report on those, and we help with that, creating that baseline and reporting on that on an annual basis.
Sounds like there's a lot of progress, you know, that's been made, but your catch-up point does allude to the fact that there's still a little bit more work that needs to be done. Some might argue to say that we are still nascent, you know, in our understanding of ESG and how, you know, you can get to the net zeros, you know, that we're talking about. I want to come back to you, Brian, around your, what you call this, your ethos as Rise Against Hunger, to understand, you guys you've given us the mission, right? And to maybe understand some of the other things that you guys are doing or how you are actually operationalizing on the ground.
So yeah, I mentioned just now about one of our core programs called the ECD Connect program, Early Childhood Development. So for us, it's not just about feeding the kids nutritious food. It's a very much of an outcomes measurable program that we have. In a nutshell, for every one box of meals that we give to the ECD, it creates a savings for them of around about 300 Rand. And then we sort of walk a journey with them over a period of years and ensure that they're reinvesting that money back into the facility to improve the educational standards, teacher training, etc., etc. And you know, over the years, we've seen a whole lot of these creches, daycare centers, ECDs develop from one small room at the back of a house with maybe 30 or 40 children in it of all different ages. And through that savings that we help create, they're able to build 2-3 classrooms, start splitting the kids. They have now the resources to send their teachers and practitioners to get proper qualifications in that space. And that in itself creates, you know, additional jobs, and just improve the overall learning environment and the health and safety environment. And so the main aim for these ECDs is that they're able to comply with all Department of Basic Education standards, previously DSD standards, and start receiving a grant. And then we will slowly exit and take on more. So we're creating sort of these small micro enterprises, you know, and it's just helping them to build. And so that's a key space for us, and not just on the food side.
One of the things that undeniably has affected all companies, organizations, governments, and people around the world has been COVID-19. And in you describing all of your different activities, one of the things that was apparent is the fact that for you guys, 2019 was, you know, your best year on record, right? How are you guys, can I use the word recovering, or, you know, you know, post, you know, those years to actually balance out what happened?
Yes, I mean, it obviously made a huge impact. So from a funding side, we were very fortunate that a lot of corporates who had already committed in 2020 to be part of the meal packing events we do and what have you, they still kept their commitment. So we're still able to get the funding. You know, our whole fundraising model entails getting, you know, up to 20 people on production lines, shoulder to shoulder, packing our meals. And of course, with social distancing, that really, you know, changed things. So fortunately, the funding still came in. And then what we did is we employed people at our 3 warehouses around the country to pack full time. It's a much more controllable environment. You can, you know, move them around. And so we actually got people on a full-time basis to pack these meals. And then our distribution shifted. A lot of our ECDs that we deal with obviously were closed. So then we were able to get into that space to assist people who had been affected, you know, by COVID, who weren't able to work and only earn a living. And from an NGO space, it really took us all, I think, to another level because we all started working together. We were able to distribute in 9 provinces around the country, and we didn't have a presence before. We were able to, you know, team up with other NGOs in that space who are already on the ground and work together and provide them with meals. So from that side, it was quite a learning curve. And from a fundraising side, it really caused us to, pushed us to think out the box and get some diversity within our fundraising stream, and not just these meal packing events, which we typically known for with corporates. And we created some online events, virtual events, tapped more into individual donors, and we did some really fun projects. But you had to really get creative.
Crisis can really be an opportunity. If you're open-minded and you see it in that way. I would encourage you to try this out. It's really, really amazing. It's an amazing experience. It's really, I call it food for the soul. And Brian was talking about a minimum of 20 people that are there. We participated in one in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. It was really amazing to see the energy there and people feeling like they are part of change. Because I have always believed in my life that there's a lot of dependency on governments. Yes, governments have got a civil duty to do some of those things. But as business, we've got an opportunity to accelerate this, to your point around working against time. And I think as individuals, we also have an opportunity to be part of the solution. All of us. So this is truly amazing.
You talk about the events and the energy. I've done hundreds and hundreds of events over the years, and I don't think I've ever been to a bad one. They all, because I think people inherently want to do good, and everybody wants to help. They might just not know where to help, or maybe they don't have the time to help, and maybe often help is often thought of as just digging deep, giving money. So that it's a great platform, to get corporates together, make it a team building event. And there's a lot of energy and positivity because people are doing good and people want to do good.
Now, I think, for your organization, I really think Zuko should be employed as an evangelist of some sort, because
I'm committing to doing another one and Brian has to be there.
Oh, definitely. Be there.
Sometimes the argument against sustainability issues back in the day was this feeling that if you try to protect the planet and people and communities, the environment and all that, it might come at the cost, of your bottom line. And everyone in business is there to make a profit. But does sustainability have to come at the sacrifice of profits? I'm going to start with the corporate person here, just to get your take on that one.
Well, it couldn't be far from the truth. It is perception. There's a lot of people who believe that. Fortunately, there are organizations like mine who have realized that for many years now, that doing good is doing well. The two are not mutually exclusive. You can do good and still do well as an organization. And if you've been following Salesforce as a company for that, and Salesforce is a company that's relatively young, it's about 23 years old, 23, 24 years old now. But when you look at how the company has grown at an exponential rate at an average of about 25 to 30% year on year, and paid close attention to sustainability. So this is why I'm saying that couldn't be far from the truth. It's the two are not mutually exclusive. It is possible to do both. Fact of the matter is that if we do not take care of this planet, then what is the point for our future generations?
So that's the argument that's coming in from Zuko to say, look at one of the fastest growing companies in the world, relatively young, 23 years old. They've achieved massive growth, but still being able to keep an eye and invest in, sustainability. Your business model slightly, is different, but your take on the profitability issue.
Well, if we drill down to some of the projects that we're involved with, like the sustainable farming, for example, some of the smaller projects that we have based at these ECDs, but kickstarting them, getting them going, and letting them grow their own vegetables is saving them money because they don't have to go and purchase that veg now. The bigger community projects we have, we're able to supply a whole lot of women within that community who have their smaller micro vegetable markets.
Yeah.
And so previously they would have to either drive all the way to the Joburg market, drive back, 60-kilometer trip, cost money, or use a middleman and he's making his profits. Whereas now they can literally walk to one of our areas, and whether so their input costs are reduced, and they'll probably there's pretty much standard prices within communities, so their costs are coming down, their profits are going up, and that's just really drilling down to the smaller basics. But I think overall, creating as many, whether it's environmental or in the food space, all these sustainable projects, it's really going to save a lot of money long term.
Yeah.
Because we're going to end up with huge costs to fix the problems.
Yeah. I'll actually relate, a story of, where I grew up and where I think you can see, issues of sustainability actually acting positively for the bottom line. Where we grew up, it's a giant sugar farm. And what was interesting is that housing in the area was built by the company, right? And what was interesting is that your water systems, they run two parallel water systems. So the water that is attached to our house or in our house is treated water, good for drinking. But all taps that are not attached to a building, that are outside, is raw water that's coming straight from a river or whatever the source is. So you can, you can go and water your plants, your gardening, all of that stuff without necessarily putting your
strain on the water for drinking.
Exactly. But the clever thing is obviously the fact that grass takes way more water than me just showering. So if you're just going to put water straight from the river, that's way more sustainable. And it's costing you less because your treated chemicals and all of that are just for the aspect of the drinking water. So I can definitely see the argument from
We'll take it you're a KZN boy, huh?
Related.
with the water as well. With our sustainable farming projects, the first one we started off as very sort of traditional farming. But the new one we're about to start, which is based at the Vol University of Technology, is going to be really exciting because it's a pure hydroponics type setup. And so we've got to think very water wise. There's a lot of water around now, but 2-3 years time. So I mean, one has to think of these things, and it might be a bigger cost now, input cost, but it's certainly going to be, save us long term. You start paying a fortune for water.
I like this place that we are in the conversation because clearly there's a business case, for sustainability, investing in it, and the question is about why is it important to be a leader, a leader in business when it comes to sustainability.
Focusing on sustainability it's a must. It's something we have to, it's a reality, it's something we really have to start dealing with more and more and more. So if you're not aligning your programs, whichever field you're in, you're going to be left behind. So whether you're a leader or just part of it, it's something that has to be part of your business model, for profit or non-for-profit. And then obviously if you can try and stay ahead of the curve and keep up with the latest technology and be seen as a leader, then you could obviously get a lot more support and move that change and that mindset a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Other than an obsession to be a leader from a country perspective, which is debatable in Africa because we've seen countries overtaking South Africa in some parts of Africa.
Yeah.
But I think South Africa sits in a very, very sweet spot because we arguably one of the most developed economies and countries in Africa. So there's a lot of inspiration that a number of countries in Africa take from South Africa. So I see this as an amazing opportunity to inspire others. I also see that there's in every crisis there's an opportunity to learn as well.
Yep.
We've had hard times, tough times in South Africa, and most recently, we've seen places that have had drought, places that have had a huge impact. And, when there's no rain, it affects the very same environment that Brian was talking about. How do you grow plants? How do you ensure that you feed people?
Yeah.
So from a sustainability point of view, the responsibility is huge. That in times like these, where we've got lots of rain, we need to be smart on how we use the water. To your example that you gave just now, I think for me, the importance of South Africa leading is to help the entire continent, because we are interlinked, whether we like it or not. It doesn't matter whether you're in South Africa or you are in West or East Africa, and we might learn other things from other parts of Africa, but I think from a leadership point of view, it's a golden opportunity for us.
It's really great, to see all the efforts that are being made to actually bring, the world of sustainability and business together, and all of the different efforts, that are being made, and how, your two organizations are, working to possibly tackle one of the biggest problems, that exists in the world. And, it has really been a great, discussion, just understanding how, you can have people that are passionate, on two sides, but if they come together, you can really go far, on that front, and how sustainability over time has evolved in terms of the journey, back in the day being, something that people sort of took as nice to have or a tick box, but now to a point where it's now a core, business value, and something that businesses are actually investing in. And I think that's a nice way for us to round up, today's discussion. But before I let you go, we have a tradition here where we ask, just our final question. And Zuko, this one is, for you, just around your best and worst career advice.
Wow. Interesting. I feel like I'm getting old, because I have to think back to what I was told back in the days. I'd say I was actually quite fortunate that at a very young age, from a career point of view, I got what I would say is arguably good advice. That, do not compromise the long-term goal with short-term goals.
Yeah.
That's the advice that for me, it still resonates to the day. But I think as I get older, one of the things that I've really realized, maybe is a spin-off out of that, is that we all, as long as you live a life with purpose, a job becomes something totally different. You become passionate about what you're doing because there's a bigger purpose other than just making a living. So I'd say in my 25 plus years, that's one of the things that I have learned. And as a result, the organizations that I work for, certainly with Salesforce, it is a big part of my purpose.
Yeah.
And part of that purpose is, how do I make a difference? How do I leave a legacy? And lead the company to the next frontier?
Next frontier. All right. Brian, for you, it's about what best and worst business advice that you've ever had.
Best and worst business advice. Let's refer this back to Zuko. I think from, if I could just talk about our own organization, when we look at our business, is to really, you pick where you want to go, you pick your focus and your challenge, and try and stick to it. I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities for certain companies to become quite diverse. But I think in our space, we have to remain focused on what we want to do to make the biggest impact.
Yeah.
And so even our sustainable farming and our feeding, they all tie into that early childhood development, to remain focused on there. The worst, what did you say? The worst advice?
Yeah.
Would possibly not keep up with all your due diligence documents, because the world in the NGO space has changed, and corporates really delve in and do huge due diligence on NGOs, from tax and compliance to you name it. So if you're in that space, make sure your paperwork's in order, otherwise.
And I guess it speaks to the report you mentioned earlier as well, ensuring that you've got everything T's crossed.
Correct, yeah. And there's, I think there's so many new charity entrants, which their intentions might be worthwhile, but maybe they can't fulfill their initial purpose. And unfortunately, like in every space, there are those who are going to take a chance. and get some money and buy a new car for themselves.
Okay, cool. So I think that's a good place for us to end today's discussion. Not sure if there's anything else to add, but it's really been a great one. Seeing the partnership that you guys have, and I'm not sure. Do you wanna?
I would love to ask Brian if he doesn't mind. I'm sorry for doing this, Brian, but it's an opportunity for me to feed my curiosity.
Yeah.
You are in the space of trying to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And one thing that I always ponder on is that we're still struggling with world hunger, even though there is so much surplus food in the world. You would have the numbers, probably in excess of 30% that's food that's going to waste. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes very difficult to understand. The overall worldwide number of people who are food insecure is actually increasing. At one point it was decreasing, so it's almost like we're kind of going a bit backwards. And you're right, the stat is around about 30% of all food that's produced is ending up on wastefulls. I think there's always going to be hunger in the world due to conflict and droughts brought on by climate change and what have you. So there's always going to be those scenarios. But there shouldn't be, and specifically in a country like South Africa. But I think there's a lot of organizations that are making progress and a lot of corporates, businesses that are, moving into that space of sorting out waste or excess food, for example, looking at ways on how to move food around to those who need from the surplus. But I definitely think, for me, it's going to take collaboration of government, business, civil society, and individuals. And the point is, who's all going to drive it? So, in my opinion, government should be driving something like that.
Yeah.
Business is already coming to the party, but it'll just provide a better platform for them to come to the party. And then from an individual perspective, sometimes in like 2020 or just after the floods, hunger is prevalent on everybody's mind. And everybody's aware of it. And then it comes off the front pages of the news and it dies down again and you go back to your day-to-day life. So that's why we always encourage, we call it growing the movement. And we always try and encourage people to just, continuously think about it, repost, retweet, messages about hunger, because it's still there. If it's off the front pages, we still have, 13, 14 million people in this country that are food insecure. So collaboration, and there's not enough collaboration, and that's probably why we end up in that situation. As I said, there's things which are inevitable in a country like South Africa. I mean, I know pre-COVID we were a net exporter as opposed to an importer, and yet we have such a food crisis. So there's a lot to be done, and we can do it. And hopefully government will just drive it a little bit more. And for everybody to come together, I think we can end hunger, specifically in South Africa.
So growing the movement.
Super.
Maybe I didn't solve your question.
No. So what you saying, I mean, to summarize in the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until we do it.
100%.
As long as there are organizations like yours and the partnerships that we have with us and many other organizations, it's within us to achieve this.
And it's a case of constantly, chipping away at the problem. And eventually we'll get there. But we have to remain optimistic.
No.
I am always optimistic because I get to deal with so many different businesses.
So that brings us to the end of this discussion. It was a brilliant one. Talking to Brian and talking to Zuko just around, all of the issues around sustainability. I'd say there were two, very key points that came out. The first one being the fact that there has really been a big evolution just around how companies and businesses are thinking about and investing in sustainability and how they're actually measuring it. And then secondly, to say that there's a lot of power that comes when you have those synergies that come from people attacking the problem from different sides. And I guess a bonus is the fact that technology can actually be used in a big way, to measure what's actually happening on the ground and to improve a lot of the processes that have been there. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
It's been good.
All right.
Thanks.
So that brings us to the end. That has been another edition of Techforce Africa, where we explore important issues that are affecting technology businesses in Africa.